All right, looks like we're about to get started, and we are right on time. So, Dave, do you want to get us started?
You bet, you bet. So thank you all for joining. We're just incredibly excited to be chatting with you today about a topic that is certainly top of mind for just about every organization right now, which is navigating the new flexible work arrangements, whether that's hybrid or distributed work, or more broadly, just providing employees with the freedom and flexibility to work where they want to. I'm Dave Mays. I'm a principal at KPMG, and along with Shipra, lead our Work From Anywhere initiative for KPMG's tax practice. I've spent my career advising organizations on employee mobility. And probably about 5 years ago or so, I was part of a team that was looking at the future of work and the future of mobility. And I was really seeing a growing trend, I'll say particularly in my tech clients, that were looking to support a more distributed team across state borders and country borders. It was certainly largely driven by the need to find top tech talent outside of the traditional tech hubs, and but also as a way to provide just additional employee flexibility and additional benefits. Because as I would often say, you can only give away so many free snacks before employees start asking for what's next. And I guess if you've ever read the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, you'll know exactly what I mean. But I think what was missing from some of those early days of the distributed workforce discussion was the need to address some of the broader impact on organizational risk and operations. And so really, we've been working over the last couple of years with a number of organizations to help them provide the flexibility that employees are demanding, while still managing that operational risk and those challenges that are inherent, but doing so in a practical way.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I am Shipra Thareja, and Dave and I have been on this journey navigating the unknown in our flexible work world together. My background is global mobility and international tax, and I've been heavily focused in helping clients in the crossover space between HR and tax matters. Our efforts were more focused on operationalizing the global ways of working, but over the last 2 years, they have shifted to helping companies actually figure out what they want to do first from a global way of working perspective before we get to the operationalization part. As we all know, mobility was often like limited to a certain section of the population in the company, and in many cases, to really some of the larger organizations. But what we are finding that managing cross-border arrangements has become a topic that every company has to address, whether they are just US domestic based or they have an international presence. What we are hoping and what we are going to share with you today are some insights. Some insights we have gathered from interactions with dozens of organizations across industries and sizes. While we've been living through this massive disruption to our ways of working, we see an opportunity in change. And we'll share how we are helping a number of leading clients take advantage of those opportunities. To frame our discussion today, we're going to focus on three key areas that organizations are applying to practically bring flexible ways of working to life. First, being what guardrails companies are establishing to ring fence their risk. Second, looking at how they can leverage technology to ease administration and provide flexibility. And third, use of employment structures to support their talent expansion programs. So, really looking at from a guardrails, technology, and employment structure perspective. Um, Clearly, there has been a lot of uncertainty around what the new way of work will look like. The one thing that we are seeing with resounding clarity is that flexibility is here to stay.
And it's so true, right? Maybe so. I'll start with just sharing some market insights here, and I'll say largely at that the macro level, a lot of the drivers for for greater employee flexibility, are the things that we've seen in the headlines, right? The war for talent, the Great Resignation, but that really boils down to the fact that it is certainly a talent-driven market, and so organizations are just looking to provide more flexibility, more remote work, and more hybrid work. So I'll start with maybe some observations in the hybrid workspace. We've seen just a number of companies that have maybe mandated early on some of the number fixed number of days that they're requiring folks to be in the office, and for all of the right reasons, right? So for collaboration and culture connection and productivity, but it's been a struggle, to say the least, to get folks to actually come into the office and adhere to those mandates. And so what we learned from that is those hard and fast mandates really aren't resonating with a lot of folks. They don't like to be told, "Thou shalt come into the office Monday, Wednesday, Friday." So organizations have been looking to take a little bit more of a carrot rather than a stick approach to get employees to want to come into the office, to create that sense of purpose for being there. Or as my teenage daughter would say, they're trying to create a sense of FOMO so that folks want to come back into the office. So that talent market is also driving a number of other companies to supporting hiring in other jurisdictions or allowing remote work in locations where they haven't historically done business. So just for example, one of a regional healthcare system that we were working with only had typically operations in a handful of states. Now they're looking to hire and fill positions in states throughout the US. And that has created some operational challenges for them and additional compliance challenges. We see that not just in the US, but across international markets. Organizations finding that they can tap into talent pools in other countries that they had never been able to tap into before. So those operational challenges, the tax challenges are immense. And the functions within an organization that are responsible for managing that risk, for managing that compliance, tax, legal, HR, finance, they're really being pushed by the businesses to say yes to flexibility, and here's how we can support it, rather than no, and here's why not in the past.
That's great. That's exactly right. I love that saying, yes and how, and not no and why. So let's put that into action. And let's talk about those practical solutions and how we are seeing companies really bring their flexible work policies to place into life. As I mentioned, there are three practical solutions that we'll talk through. One, policy guardrails, second, technology tools, and third, employment structure. So I'll start with the policy guardrails first. The way I think about it is what like watching my kids at a bowling party. These guardrails are pretty much like those bumpers they use in bowling alleys. These guardrails are like helping clients prevent them from getting into that compliance gutter. So let's talk about what some of these key guardrails could be. It comes down to one, managing the locations where employees are working at. Second, managing the duration. How long are they working from that location? And third, managing the activities they do in those locations. Or said another way, who can perform what activities from which location for how long? So if you think about it, there's a pendulum. There's a pendulum of flexibility that has been swinging pretty widely over the last 2 years. On the one extreme, it's 100% flexibility of working from anywhere. And on the other extreme, it is 100% that you're back in the office. What we are finding is that organizations have landed on that happy medium in the middle, where we expect hybrid work arrangements are going to be here to stay for good. But that is one of the more complex arrangements to actually put into place and manage from a compliance requirement perspective, because you are really straddling both the worlds where somebody is working remotely part of the time and the other time they are in the office. But this is what the tax person in me really enjoys, is handling those challenges and making sure that business operations work pretty smoothly. If you start to think about how do you put guardrails into place, you do have to mark it into two sections here. One focus on domestic and the other focus on international. On the domestic context, we will find that companies often specify guardrails around that you have to be within commuting distance of the office. That kind of limits the number of states you could be working at, and therefore it provides companies some sort of uh, parameters to say, okay, we know we will have exposure in these states, we will have multi-state withholding in these states, and we can plan for it. So it really gives them a framework, an operational framework to work with, but you do have to upfront specify, what is your expectation, where could employees be, how far they could live from the office, how many days really you want them to come into the office, etc. On the international side of things, it is a different ballgame. And it could be that what we are seeing, a number of companies are getting requests from their employees saying that we want to go on vacation and maybe add a few more days to that vacation and work from that location, or as we call it, a workation. And that's really interesting because typically you could go on vacation, and obviously you would come back, and but now there's that added flexibility that you could add on a few days of work. But from a regulatory and a compliance perspective, that just opens a whole new Pandora's box. So, from a flexibility perspective, from an employee experience perspective, companies are making arrangements that they can facilitate these workation kind of requests, but they are making sure that they're asking the employees to certify upfront that they do have the right to work in those locations, and they're also specifying the number of days that you can take a vacation. And in many cases they start with, say, a 14-day limit. Employees often will submit a request and say, we want to work on a vacation basis for 30 days or 60 days. And that's where companies to really take and pause and see, is it going to expose them to additional tax exposure, compliance requirements, etc. Because the longer that arrangement goes on, the higher there's risk from a tax and regulatory point of view. And on the other hand, it could also be that somebody, say, wants to work even longer in a remote work situation. Maybe it's because of family reasons. Maybe HR finds somebody in a location where you don't have a legal entity, and that's where they start to work at. So that could be an extended period of time that somebody's working remotely, and say for 6 months. In those cases, there are obviously more significant challenges that come along with, one, making sure there's a work permit in place. Second, making sure that or reviewing what your compliance obligations are, and then understanding how can you complete those compliance obligations upfront. So it does require a very careful coordination between the various stakeholders in an organization to come together for a meeting of minds to understand what our risk appetite will be from an organizational perspective. Once we have approved for something, how will we operationalize it? And that's where we are finding a number of companies struggle, because philosophically, everybody wants to approve it. But it's really the operationalization part that companies are finding a little bit challenging in the current environment.
I think that's a really good point, Shipper. Right, the each of the different functions within an organization is going to be looking at these issues through their own lens, right? Legal and immigration are going to be worried about those employment law issues, and tax is going to be concerned about creating presence in other locations and changing their effective tax rates. So maybe you can share a little bit with the listeners about how organizations are coming to consensus, how we're helping them to make some of those decisions with all of the different stakeholders and their different perspectives.
That's the key word. All of the stakeholders is from their different perspectives. There's really, because there's such a wide variety of considerations and drivers from various stakeholders' point of view, what we're finding there's almost the sense of paralysis by analysis. Everybody is in their swim lanes trying to solve for what their day-to-day job entails. And that's where we are finding that sometimes there's no organizational alignment on what those guardrails should be, how should they operationalize it. And what we have found to be really successful in this is perhaps a stakeholder interview workshop kind of a setting where we can facilitate from an outside in point of view a discussion around first of all identifying what are the key drivers for each of the stakeholders, what are the success factors, what are the considerations that they're dealing with and challenges that they're facing, and then build consensus by identifying what are organizational priorities that we want to solve for as a group, and then layer on from a functional point of view, how best do we solve for those priorities such that no one function is overly burdened or is really, struggling to meet those organizational guidelines, etc. There is a big element of market insights in these stakeholder workshops, which brings in that outside in view that I mentioned. So it's about knowing what other companies are doing, knowing how they're solving for similar issues also does go a long way in building that organizational consensus within the organization.
Those are really good points. And when we think about the other kind of the next practical solution that companies are looking to implement, it comes down to implementing some sort of a technology solution that can help the organizations to automate and streamline some of their processes, right? In the dozens and dozens of conversations we've had with companies, there's a common refrain that they're being asked to do more with less, right? Take on more on their plate without a lot of extra resources to support the new initiatives. And so, of course, they're looking to technology to help to automate as much as possible. And so, what in the flexible work world, the challenges that they're trying to solve for are how do we provide our employees with the right employee experience so they can let us know the type of flexible work arrangements that they want, whether that's a hybrid arrangement, remote work arrangement, or some sort of a workation request. And so providing that right employee experience to intake those requests and house that information that then goes through a workflow process for the right approvals. The right approvals could be through a line manager approval, depending on the different risk areas that may be impacted, could be reviewed by corporate tax or payroll or finance or legal, as the case may be. So it's important to have some systems that assist with that workflow. And then finally, looking to the complete the cycle with operationalizing some of the payroll activities or other compliance activities that may be needed to make sure that that employee is working on their flexible work arrangement in a compliant way. So what we're hearing across our client base is they're looking to do one of three things with technology: build, buy, or get by. And I'll start with the get by, which is where we've been living for the last couple of years. As Shipra said, the pendulum has been swinging. Organizations have been hesitant to make large scale investments in technology to support flexibility. And so really have been just getting by using spreadsheets or small modifications to their HR systems to track where employees are working. That started to shift over the last several months as flexibility is now here to stay. And so they're looking at either buying out of the box solutions that can help, or more often looking to build on top of the existing technology infrastructure that they've already been investing in. So leveraging tools like low-code workflow tools, whether that's Power Apps or ServiceNow, Dovetail, the like, to provide that an employee intake and strong workflow capabilities, or leveraging HRIS systems, Workday, Oracle, etc., to make sure that the HR systems are updated in the single source of truth. But as we talk to a number of organizations that have been looking at their technology stack to solve these solutions, they're finding gaps. They're finding gaps in making that system as automated as possible and as seamless to both the internal users and to their employees. So to solve for that, we're helping them develop blueprints to do a current state assessment of the technology infrastructure, identify those gaps, and then find the right solutions that are customized to their organization. That blueprinting methodology has really become a critical piece of solving for the flexible work arrangements, and to do so in a very practical way so that organizations can continue to leverage the technology that they have.
That's great, Dave. So we mentioned gonna walk through three practical solutions. We walked through the guardrails, we walked through the technology solutions, and now it's time for the structure discussions. Again, going back to that example that I use around talent acquisition, saying that we want to hire somebody in a location we may not have a local legal entity, or an employee raising their hand and saying, I want to work flexibility in a country where there is no legal entity. And how do companies facilitate that? What we are finding is companies are looking for solutions that preemptively ring fence their risk, and setting up a separate special purpose entity that becomes the employer of these individuals that do not have a local legal employer is often something that companies are exploring. We call them a global workforce company, which is essentially a separate legal entity within the organization that becomes the employer of these individuals and carries out all penal obligations, all withholding obligations, provides the benefits, etc., necessary to these employees. There are other structures as well in place that can provide similar benefits, similar services, and as you may all be familiar with, professional employment organizations or PEOs or employer of record organizations, which become the employer of individuals without a local legal employer and run all the compliance obligations. All three of these actually, the GWC, the Global Workforce Company, employer of records, and professional employment organizations, they all come with their pros and cons, and is understanding how those pros and cons apply to your organization. That is the key here. So we've been helping a number of our clients run those feasibility studies to determine the relative cost and benefits of each of the models, to understand what are the qualitative drivers and the qualitative drivers under each of the models, and come up with an optimal solution for their short term and long term. We have found that global workforce companies do work well in the long term, but obviously, as I mentioned, they do have their costs and benefits which should be fully weighed, and the feasibility study helps you determine which model is best for you in the short term and the long term. Like I said, it also becomes the business case that you can then take to leadership in support for taking the next steps in realizing what your long term vision could be from an employment structure point of view. So that wraps up the three of our practical solutions for today.
Yeah, thank you, Shipra. And maybe I'll say we've covered a lot of ground here. And just to recap a few of the key messages, which are really one, look for some practical solutions. Set your guardrails around the locations, the duration, and the activities that you'll allow to help ring fence your organizational risk. Two, look at some of the technology that's available in your current stack to help you with that build, buy, and get by decision, and develop a blueprint to make sure you're connecting all of the dots to support an end-to-end process. Three, look at your employment tax structures to help you with a thoughtful meaningful strategy for both the short term and long term. Thank you again so much for joining our LinkedIn Live session today. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and follow our National Global Mobility Services leader, Bob Mishler, for more global mobility insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.